It was a time of empire and ambition, of loyalty and rebellion. In the late 18th century, 13 British colonies on the edge of the Atlantic dared to challenge the most powerful empire on earth. They were farmers, merchants, and dreamers, ordinary people who rose against kings and armies to claim one extraordinary thing: freedom. This is the story of the American Revolution, how a scattered group of colonies became the United States of America. For much of the 18th century, life in the American colonies was peaceful, prosperous even. The colonies stretched along the Atlantic coast, from New England's cold harbors to the tobacco fields of Virginia and the rice plantations of the Carolinas. Though they were thousands of miles away, the colonists still saw themselves as loyal subjects of the British Crown. But everything began to change after the French and Indian War ended in 1763. Britain had won, but victory came at a heavy cost. To pay for the war, the British government turned to its colonies. They passed new laws: the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, taxing everything from newspapers to tea. To the colonists, this was tyranny. They had no voice in Parliament. Their cry became famous across the colonies: "No taxation without representation." Protests erupted. Boycotts began. And in taverns and meeting halls, whispers of independence slowly began to grow louder. By 1770, the streets of Boston were boiling with anger. Then, one cold March night, British soldiers fired into a mob of angry colonists. 5 men lay dead. The Boston Massacre shocked the colonies. Paul Revere's engraving of the scene spread outrage across America. But the breaking point came 3 years later, December 16, 1773. A group of colonists, disguised as Mohawk Indians, crept aboard ships in Boston Harbor and dumped 342 chests of British tea into the icy water. The Boston Tea Party had begun. The British were furious. They punished Boston with harsh laws known as the Coercive Acts, or as the colonists called them, the Intolerable Acts. In response, the colonies came together for the first time. In 1774, delegates from 12 colonies met in Philadelphia at the First Continental Congress. It was no longer just protest. It was unity. And soon, it would be war. April 19, 1775. At dawn in the small towns of Lexington and Concord, British soldiers marched to seize colonial weapons. Local militiamen, the Minutemen, confronted them. A shot rang out. No one knows who fired first. But that single shot echoed around the world. The American Revolutionary War had begun. The British won early skirmishes, but the rebellion had lit a fire that could not be extinguished. Within weeks, colonial militias surrounded Boston. And soon after, the Second Continental Congress appointed a tall, quiet Virginian to lead the army, George Washington. He was no king, no tyrant, just a soldier with iron resolve and belief in the cause. The colonies were no longer fighting for their rights as Englishmen. They were fighting for something greater: independence. In the summer of 1776, in the heat of Philadelphia, 56 delegates gathered once again. The debate was fierce: treason if they failed, freedom if they succeeded. On July 4, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was adopted. Thomas Jefferson's words thundered through history. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." With the stroke of a pen, the colonies declared themselves free and independent states. and King George III became their enemy. But freedom would not come easily. The early years of the war were brutal. Washington's army was poorly trained, poorly equipped, and constantly on the run. In 1776, the British captured New York City. By winter, Washington's men were cold, hungry, and losing hope. Then, on Christmas night, Washington made a daring move. He crossed the icy Delaware River, surprising the Hessian troops at Trenton. It was a small victory, but it revived a dying cause. Over the years, the war stretched on. Battles raged at Saratoga, Valley Forge, and Monmouth. The soldiers suffered, but they endured, driven by the belief that liberty was worth any price. At Saratoga in 1777, the Americans achieved a stunning victory, one that convinced France to join the war on their side. Now, the revolution was not just a rebellion, it was an international war. By 1781, the war had reached its climax. British General Cornwallis moved his troops to Yorktown, Virginia, unaware that a trap was closing in. Washington marched his army south while French ships blocked the British escape by sea. After weeks of bombardment, Cornwallis surrendered. The world's mightiest empire had been defeated by its own colonies. 2 years later, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Britain officially recognized the independence of the United States of America. A new nation was born, fragile, uncertain, but free. The revolution was more than a war. It was a turning point in human history, a declaration that ordinary people had the right to govern themselves. George Washington would become the first president. The Constitution and Bill of Rights would soon follow. And the words written in 1776 would echo across centuries. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The American Revolution was not perfect. Freedom did not reach everyone at once. But it planted an idea that people could rise, resist, and build a world of their own making. From Lexington to Yorktown, from rebellion to nationhood. This was the beginning of the American story.